This is the British Broadcasting Corporation. I'll Eat My Hat, a series of illustrated talks on the history of sports broadcasting on the wireless. Your presenter is Mr. Desmond Lynam.
Hello. Today we look at the war and immediate post-war years, when interest in sport reached an all-time high and the BBC at last found commentators to match. There might have been no sport on the radio during the Second World War at all. On the eve of the 1940 Derby, a decision initiated by the government was taken to suspend all sports commentaries. A memo of the time said that the broadcasting of sports could be giving them an undue prominence and give a false impression of the general attitude of this country in the present critical conditions. However, it was soon realized that the public needed relief from news of the war and that sport had a vital role to play. Sports events were gradually put back on the air, but with restrictions, as Robert Hudson, who was to become head of outside broadcasting, points out.
The BBC broadcast some cricket matches actually during the war. I think many people wouldn't realize that. They weren't allowed to mention the weather. Presumably, if Adolf Hitler had been listening and heard it was a sticky wicket at Lord's, he might have think it was raining or something, and that might alter his plans for the next air raid.
Here comes Nye again. Oh, a beautiful straight drive by Smith. It's going away down to the right-hand side screen. It won't quite get there. There's a very long way to go on this unspecified ground somewhere in England.
That was Howard Marshall from an unspecified ground somewhere in England, which turned out to be Lord's. Well, the Germans would never have worked that one out, would they? Sport wasn't quite the same during wartime. After all, for a short time, Aldershot were the best football team in the country. And there was something different about the FA Cup as well.
Score after 28 minutes play, still Blackpool 1, Sheffield Wednesday 0 in the second leg of this cup final here at Hillsborough. Hubbock and Hayward watching the ball very carefully. Hayward clears, long high kick, back up into the Wednesday half. None of the Wednesday forwards are up there, and Blackpool trying to get away now through Burbanks. Burbanks through to Dodds. Dodds going through on his own, puts it through to Burbanks. Burbanks cutting in himself now. He's fighting within 5 yards, and actually he gets the ball through to Dodds. Shoots! Dodds, no, he misses it. He missed the ball completely. Put it to Gardner, and Gardner scores. Gardner scored for Blackpool.
That was Raymond Glendenning at the second leg of the FA Cup final North in 1943. Many of the pre-war commentators had joined the armed forces, although for some of them, a reflection of the BBC's selection procedures of the time, it was simply a matter of rejoining. Just before the war, Commander Tommy Woodruff had established himself as a fast-talking and knowledgeable commentator, but he remained at a desk in the Navy after 1945. The first commentator of all, Captain H.B.T. Wakelam, was wounded during the war and was unable to return to the BBC. A new team was needed, and soon a new team emerged. It's difficult to overemphasize how important the OB department was to the public. Men like Winford Vaughan Thomas, Richard Dimbleby, and Freddie Griswood maintained the link between the armed forces and the public as war correspondents. The standing of the OB department was at its zenith during and just after the war, and its leading figure was another war correspondent and a Canadian. His colleague of the time, Max Robertson, tries to explain his special appeal.
Stuart McPherson really had the country by its ears in early days after the war. In many ways, Stuart was the number one commentator. I think most people thought he was terrific. And largely, I think why they thought so was that he had these expressions which were totally new to them, and people thought, what marvelous expressions. How it really makes the thing come to life. I dare say that many of them were North American cliches.
Before the war, McPherson had commentated on ice hockey for the BBC while working at Wembley Stadium. In a conversation with John Snagg, he described how he first came to work for the corporation.
The first commentary I ever did in my life was the ice hockey commentary.
But you told me at the time, Stuart, you know, that you'd done a lot of ice hockey commentaries, had you?
No, I hadn't.
Thank you.
God forbid. No, I hadn't. I was rather anxious to do something. But do you remember the first ice hockey that I did? Because I do. Terribly.
But that was in competition, wasn't it?
There were 8. There were 5 Englishmen, 2 South Africans, and myself. And it was the first time that I ever met Michael Stanley. And I must admit, I thought he was about the coldest string of cold water I'd ever seen in my life. And there were 8 of us. And they all went in with their programs and their charts. And I was last in, and I didn't have any program. And it was obvious that I impressed Standing because I was calling out these names very quickly, and he was trying to check them, having some difficulty with his program because I was calling them pretty quickly. Of course, what Michael didn't know at that time, and I didn't tell him until after I got the job, was that I had grown up with 10 of the 12 players that were on the starting lineup, literally from the time we were about 6 years old. So my knowledge was pretty well founded. And that was the start, that first hockey game, November the 7th, 1937.
After the war, McPherson had a go at most sports, although there was a reluctance to let him loose on cricket. But he commentated on football, golf, athletics, swimming, and most of all boxing, but not, despite his reference here, America's favorite pastime.
It's been baseball in this first round with Sands doing all the pitching and Turpin doing the catching. It's right to left of the head by Sands. Another right to left. Turpin staggered into the corner. Sands pours on the attack, and he shifts downstairs. Now he's back up on top again with the left and right to the head. And Turpin hasn't landed a single solitary punch this round so far and has been down for a count of 8. Sands on the attack again. He sticks out a snaky left, very tantalizing, slow left hand. And Turpin is looking very worried indeed, and little wonder. Now as Sands comes in, Turpin throws a wide roundhouse right at him. But Sands just rides the punch carefully and goes into the left and right at the head. And Turpin's looking very worried indeed, very worried.
That was from a 1949 fight where Dave Sands knocked out Randolph Turpin. Between rounds, McPherson would call in his expert summarizer, veteran referee W. Barrington Dalby, with the words, "Come in, Barry." This became a national catchphrase, one that has since fallen into disuse, until now. Come in, Barry.
Anyway, I did get an inkling of the pitfalls lying in the way to the broadcaster because this chap, I think it was Bob Bowman, who was doing the setting the scene, he'd been given a list of people who were there, and he said, amongst others, Lord Tweedmouth was there, Vice Chairman of Boxing Board of Control. Lord Tweedmouth had been dead 2 years. There was nearly a question raised in the House about that. Lady Tweedmouth was furious about it, wrote to the board. They had to arrive with the BBC about it, and I thought the whole thing was going to blow up. However, Lobby settled that. But in addition, he said that a certain noble lord, a well-known sporting peer, and a lovely actress were side by side at the ring, which is perfectly true. Well, apparently her ladyship didn't know that her husband was there that night. She thought he was in Scotland. After that, we had to be very careful and ask, you see. And they asked me to go round one night to old Tom Walls. And I said, you know, did he mind if we said he was there? And he'd heard about this. And he said, no, Barry, I don't mind a bit. What's more, I'm bloody well supposed to be here.
The head of outside broadcasting, Seymour de Lobinière, universally known as Lobby, returned from his wartime job in 1945. His biggest challenge came 3 years later when the first post-war Olympics came to London. Rex Alston, Raymond Glendenning, Harold Abrahams and Max Robertson were the main team, along of course with Stuart McPherson, who didn't let being Canadian interfere with his pro-British bias, here demonstrated in the ladies' 400 metres freestyle final.
Coming up like a whirlwind on the far side is Kathy Gibson of Great Britain. She's moving up into a fight for second place. Will she get third? Will she get third? She's moving up. She's going to fight. She might even get second. And it's Curtis of the United States of America and Gibson coming up on the outside. Come on, Kathy. Once more, Kathy. Come on. Kathy Gibson fighting for second place. It's Curtis's race. Curtis of the USA wins. And will Gibson get second? She's coming like a whirlwind, Gibson. Hurry, hurry. And she just fails to get second. Kathy Gibson third.
McPherson also made his name as a presenter, introducing Down Your Way, 20 Questions, and the most popular panel show of its time, Ignorance is Bliss. In 1950, at the height of his fame, he decided to move with his family back to Canada. In his last Ignorance is Bliss, he signed off in spectacular fashion.
And in conclusion, I want to impress upon you that we're not really cuckoo. In fact, all the experts are as sane as I am. And I want to say goodbye now from Monona Barons, Gladys Train, and Dimbleby Moore. Both sides scored a goal in the last 5 minutes, and it looks now as though the Tigers have won the Ice Hockey Championship for another year. It's been a grand fight. Freddie Mills has won the first 2 sets, 8-6, 6-4. And as they come under Hammersmith Bridge, both crews have had the 14th hole. This is terrific, folks. At Tattenham Corner, Jack Solomon's out in front, followed by Henry Cotton. And from where I'm sitting, the plane's on fire, but Gordon Richards has just spotted the blue, and Joe Davis is speaking down the wing, closely followed by Johnny Weismuller and Mighty Joe Young. And as they come around again, it's Dennis Compton by a neck. He's leading by a short chin to the left. No, he's not. Yes, he is. What do you think, Barry? That's enough. And this is Stuart MacFidel saying, I can't stand anymore, I tell you. Get me out of here!
Perhaps the best-known radio commentator of all was John Arlott. As the only poet-cum-policeman in Southampton, it may have been inevitable that he wouldn't remain in the force forever, although he did stay for 11 years. He got a job as a poetry producer at the BBC in 1945, but it wasn't until the following year that he did his first cricket commentary, as he explains.
In my first summer because I was attached to Eastern Service. There was an Indian tour, and they decided to do short broadcasts to India on the first 2 matches. They knew I knew about cricket, and they assumed that I would get the Indian pronunciations right, because these men were my colleagues. Sent me off. I did the first 2 matches, and they got a cable from Jim Pennythorne Hughes, who was then BBC representative New Delhi, who was later to become one of my closest friends, I'd then never known, saying that the cricket broadcasts must be continued. So they asked me if I'd like to continue them, and I did.
The following summer, he was broadcasting to Britain rather than to India. John Arlott was at his best when the cricket was at its best. If he happened to be on air when something momentous occurred, he would always be equal to it. This happened in 1948 when Don Bradman walked out for his final Test innings. Arlott had just taken over from Rex Alston.
Well, I don't think I'm as deadly as you are, Rex. I don't expect to get a wicket, but it's rather good to be here when Don Bradman comes in to bat his last Test. And now here's Hollies to bowl to him from the Vauxhall end. He bowls, Bradman goes back across his wicket and pushes the ball gently in the direction of the Houses of Parliament, which are out beyond mid-off. It doesn't go that far, it merely goes to Watkins at silly mid-off. No runs, still 117 for 1. 2 slips, a silly mid-off and a forward short leg close to him as Hollies pitches the ball up slowly and he's bowled. Bradman bowled Hollies not. Bowled Hollies not. And what do you say under those circumstances? I wonder if you see a ball very clearly in your last Test in England, a ground where you played out some of the biggest cricket of your life, and where the opposing team have just stood round you and given you 3 cheers and the crowd has clapped you all the way to the wicket. I wonder if you really see the ball at all.
His old lobby said, I listened to you, he said, I think you've got a very vulgar voice. He said, can't understand why people want to listen to it. He said, but you've got an interesting mind. He said, and I think you'd better continue. It was pretty good lobby, really. He was a harsh critic, but his criticisms were invariably right. And of course mine was and is a vulgar voice.
When I became head of outside broadcast, I found that he was very insecure. He never really thought much of his own ability, and he always seemed to think that he might get the sack at any minute. So I tried to reassure him on that point, because it was the last thing I had in my mind.
Robert Hudson there. Arlott retired voluntarily, and to many people's surprise, after the centenary Test match of 1980. He wanted to leave without a fuss, and his final words on air were, after Trevor Bailey, it'll be Christopher Martin Jenkins. The round of applause that followed in the commentary box wasn't his last that day.
The end of a testing over from Lily, full of hostility. Close fielders still grouped round the bat, but safely and capably survived by Boycott and Gar. 72 for 2, 28 now, Boycott, 18 Gar.
The applause was for John Arlott, his last commentary.
And Trevor, the entire Australian fielders clapping, Jeff Boycott having a clap there, and I'm sure the entire ground clapping at that announcement by Alan Curtis that John has just done his final Test match session. Moment indeed of nostalgia and a very nostalgic match.
John Arlott's colleague in the commentary box from the 40s to the 60s was Rex Alston, who also specialised in rugby union, tennis and athletics. He joined the BBC in 1941, having taught at Bedford School for 17 years. Raymond Baxter remembers the atmosphere of the OB department in the post-war years and sharing an office with Rex.
In the office of the outside broadcast department, there were assembled a bunch of highly professional maniacs. For instance, we played cricket in the corridor. This was Brian Johnston's idea, of course. We didn't call him Jonas in those days. We called him BJ. I shared an office with Rex Alston, and we got on very well, although you can scarcely imagine two more disparate people. Well, Rex Alston was a schoolmaster before he became a broadcaster, and in many ways he remained a schoolmaster. He was charming, restrained, always immaculate, had a beautiful broadcasting voice, but very much the schoolmaster in the presence of a lot of naughty boys.
During the war, there was suddenly a knock on the door at lunchtime one day, and there was a BBC billeting officer saying the BBC were coming to Bedford, and I wondered, is there anything in this for me? Well, I applied, and what do you think I became? I became a billeting officer. I then became an announcer. I was drafted to Manchester, and while doing announcing there, I had the idea that I might become a commentator because I knew something about sport.
Rex was a delightful person to broadcast with, a very good, straight commentator. Now, he was accurate. Sometimes you might say that Rex was perhaps a little dull, but he was accurate. And he was an extremely nice and fair chap.
Max Robertson, who commentated on Wimbledon for 40 years, and who, along with John Arlott, Raymond Baxter, Robert Hudson, and Brian Johnston, joined the OB department just after the war. Raymond Baxter again.
It was a remarkable period because there was a collection of people of quite extraordinary personality as well as capability, all under the control, and I use the word advisedly, of the great Simon de Lotbinière, who was head of outside broadcast, and literally invented the technique of outside broadcasting, which hasn't really changed to this day.
Lobby was an imposing figure in personality and, well, height.
He was a very, very tall man, and I was not terrified, but I knew that it was very important what was going to happen in the next 2 or 3 minutes. And so I went into his office, and this immensely tall man stood up and came round his desk to meet me, and I swear dropped his knees onto a chair, which I was going to sit on, so that our first handshake would be eye to eye.
Seymour de Lotbinière was a very hard taskmaster, and he sent me off to Lord's to do, of course I thought I might be able to do cricket, having been a bit of a cricketer, so you know, and I did the first test at Lord's, sitting next to John Arlott, by the way, who was then doing his first live broadcast. And I remember thinking to myself, hearing John speak, my goodness, if they can accept a funny Hampshire voice like that, they might have me. Anyway, my first test was absolutely pulled to bits by Lobby, and he told me to go back. I thought I'd have no hope ever. But I discovered afterwards that he never gave anybody a second chance unless he really thought that they had something in them. So he gave me another go, and after that I was given a broadcast.
Lobby had a meeting every Monday morning at 9 o'clock and went through all the business, both the arrangements of the program ahead of us and who was going to do what and all that kind of thing. And then there would come the moment when Lobby, turning over the pages of the OB diary, which was a very impressive large book, would say, "Programs since we last met," and would then analyze every single program in which the department had been involved, and in the presence of everyone, say exactly what he thought about it. And that was great discipline.
Many of the pre-war commentators had other jobs. Some were journalists, some, like John Snagg, were BBC announcers. George Allison even managed to combine commentating with his job as manager of Arsenal. The team that Seymour de Lotbiniere gathered together in the 40s and 50s were in the main employed only by the outside broadcasting department. Max Robertson.
There was an extraordinary difference, really, between post-war British commentary and pre-war. In Britain, I remember my last term at Haileybury in 1934, listening to the commentary by, I think, Colonel Brand on the final between Perry and Crawford. And it was such a sort of languid performance, almost. Perry serves to the forehand, Crawford returns, Perry to the net, Crawford down the line, out. Whereas my ambition was always to try and keep up completely with the play and try and read it as much as I could.
I have a feeling that DuPont thinks she's not going to get this game. But she's fighting. She fights, she serves the left-hand court, goes up, return by Brough, half volley by DuPont. Brough passes her, no, DuPont gets it back. Brough can volley now, though, back past her backhand, and there are 2 match points to Brough.
15, 40.
2 match points were saved in the last DuPont service game. Now, can she save them now? She wipes her brow with her left hand, gives a little sort of, can I do it? And now she serves the right-hand court and goes up net, a backhand return by Brough. DuPont there with the forehand volley. Has it gone over the baseline? It has. That's the match to the reigning champion.
Max Robertson with the finale to the Wimbledon Ladies Final of 1949. A new breed may have emerged and a new professionalism adopted, but there was one event that seemed to stand still in time, the boat race.
And now it looks as though the 2 crews are absolutely level, but I'm very sorry to tell you that our launch is completely packed up, the engine has stopped, and we are left, I regret to tell you, a long way behind, and the steamers are going past us, because the launch has died on us, and at the present moment, it looks to me in the far distance as I see them, that the crews are just about level. And there are men that's trying to start the engine, but I think without any success at all. Our engine is packed up, and it seems that we shall not even here be able to tell the end of the race. I can only say to Harrods that at the present moment I can't give you any more information about the race at all. As far as I'm concerned, our launch has died on us, and we've finished. I think we're out of the race anyhow, as far as the race is concerned.
John Snagg in 1952. In that year, the BBC's brilliantly trained commentary staff were temporarily replaced, if only for one event, the Grand National. This was after a dispute over money with the owner of Aintree, Mirabel Topham. Bob Butchers and first Peter Bromley take up the story.
She didn't have any commentators, but she used Jack Topham, who was a race reader, and Bob Butchers, who was a journalist, and a lady who, I forget her name, but she'd done Gymkhanas in the Ormskirk district and was a friend of Mirabel Topham, and the result is one of the great fiascos of racing broadcasts over the last century.
Well, 2 nights before the race, my sports editor rang up and informed me that he'd put my name forward to be part of a commentary team. And we met on the following day, that'd be the Friday evening after racing, to put our act together. It was completely amateur, but I knew every horse practically by sight, which made it easy, but not having done a commentary before, the technique was missing.
Brown Jack jumped it first. I can't see any falls there at the moment, and they're all over that fence, and one's refused to hand you over to Murray Grape at the second fence.
They're just approaching the second fence, up and over. Brown Jack the third, over first of all. One's down, number 37. Brown Jack the third, down. De Grey, Scarus is well up there. Scarus, Brown Jack, and Kathleen, Rocket to 6, Roy Stewart, Nagara, Scarus, Dominic Spa, Allsted, and now I give you over to Jack Topham.
Oh, and they're coming up now through the mist. It's very difficult. It looks like Teal, rather doubtful. Yes, Teal is down.
Teal went on to romp home first, as this commentary, recorded after the event by Raymond Glendenning, shows.
And now for the run-in, 2 furlongs of it. It's neck and neck. And now Teal is gaining with about 150 yards to go. He's gaining with every stride slightly. 50 yards, he's a length clear. And at the post, it's Teal the winner. Legal Joy second. What No Sun, some way back third. Uncle Barney fourth. Overshadow fifth. Printer's Pie sixth. And then further back, Hierba, Column, Parsons Hill, and Sergeant Kelly. Well, a great race and a great win for Mr. H. Lane's Teal, trained by Neville Crump and ridden by Arthur Thompson.
In the next programme, we look at some of the attempts to cover sports not usually thought to be suitable for radio, such as angling, darts, and polo. Until then, goodbye.
You have been listening to I'll Eat My Hat, one of a series of illustrated talks on the history of sports broadcasting on the wireless. Presenter was Mr. Desmond Lynam. It was compiled and written by Mr. Bill Matthews, with additional research by Mr. Simon Bullivant. The production assistant was Miss Elaine Wigley. The producer was Mr. Richard Edis.